Okay, so welcome to it, guys. This is the class example for the inventory cycle. It is a interesting class example. It's something that we need to apply ourselves to, but also it's something that will give us some skills, particularly auditing skills in terms of professional skepticism and in terms of thinking out of the box. So let's try and pay attention and let's try and learn something in this class example today. So first what we're going to do is we're going to read through the class example together, and then we are going to attempt to compose or create our own model answer. Now you've got to remember that this is a class example, so it necessarily does not have a model answer. It's not like a past test or anything like that. And so we want to look at the mindset of examiners when they're attempting to create model answers. And so let's try and look at it from that perspective. How do we learn to create and develop and construct a model answer? So let's read through the class example together. So it starts off by saying you are the second year trainee on an audit at Boats Limited. So the first thing is you need to identify you're a second year trainee, which means you are meant to be given guidance to the first year trainees, but also you're not in charge of the audit as a whole. So it won't be a question where they ask you to review someone's work, where they're asking you to set the tone, or even if they're asking you, for example, to set the audit plan. It's not going to come up in this question. So immediately your mindset is coming around executing of the work rather than planning of the work. So that's important, and as a student you need to identify that. Then we're dealing with Boats Limited. They are a public company. It does not tell us whether they're listed or not, but they are a public company, which means they're going to be of a considerable size, as well as the fact that we are probably going to need to comply with certain laws and regulations around this company. Okay, so the next sentence is, you are presented with the following job card by the audit client. You plan to use this job card when auditing work in progress. Okay, so work in progress, as mentioned in the lecture, is a topic that often gets tested and is a topic of contention because it's audited so badly. Traditionally, it's audited so badly in practice. So we want to pay as much attention as possible to the auditing of work in progress here so that we can learn and develop. The next thing is and this is a concerning point, a point that you need to criticize and think about. We received the job card from the audit client, which is strange because it doesn't talk about us selecting a job card from a sample. It just says the audit client received the job card. So if that does come up, then maybe we should start to tinker with that and try and understand, why did we receive the job card from the audit client? We should be, and you would know, we should be obtaining the accounting records, selecting samples from the accounting records randomly or via some other means of sample selection, and you will know the different means of sample selection when you did audit sampling. And then we want to obtain those audit samples from the client. So it's not really clear about how we arrived at this job card. But anyway, let's look at it further. So it talks about the client there, Captain Snook. Job card is for... So Boats Limited seems like they're building boats here, because these items that we find in the job card are actually related to the construction of boats. So it's not a new project because there's an opening balance. Okay, so we can see that straight away. Not a new project, there's an opening balance. Talks about timber. We've got timber here, as well as piping and joints. I just want to point out one thing to you, that it doesn't necessarily give us a breakdown about how these are arrived at, how these amounts are arrived at. Okay, so it doesn't, for example, say we use so many kilos of timber and therefore that equals to so much or whatever. So that's just a point of interest for us as auditors. We've then got an engine. Okay, so there's an engine on the boat. There's a serial number. Okay, that serial number will help us when we're auditing it, right? We've got a site foreman under labor, so he would be sort of indirect labor. He's a foreman, so he's obviously overseeing the building. We've got carpenters, which seem roundabout okay because we are using joints and timber. There's a lot of hours under carpenters. And then we've got an interior designer. Which seems very interesting because the boat is still under construction. So why are we having an interior designer here? It's something for us to interrogate and question. Okay, rental of premises. It looks like there's going to be something about rental of premises a bit later, so we'll read that. Scaffolding hire, that seems about right. Security. So rental and premises and security seem very interesting. We want to find out more, right? And then obviously they've casted this here, and you can cast this in your own time and see if it all adds up. That's going to be one of our procedures that we're going to come up with. Okay, additional information. The premises is leased for 40,000 a month. Okay, a quarter of the premises, so a quarter would be 10,000, right, of the premises has been secured in a separate warehouse for the building of this specific boat. So for this boat that we're dealing with here in the job card. So if it's 10,000 Rand a month, then the rental of this premises would be 16,000, let's say 16 months. So this project has been ongoing for 16 months so far. So we want to just maintain and make sure that that's really happening. So it says, support scaffolding was required for this project. It is required on a vessel by vessel basis, okay. The monthly lease cost for the scaffolding was 5,000 per month. Okay, so interesting that the 5,000 or the scaffolding, the months that we use for scaffolding don't add up to the months that we use for the rental premises. That's just interesting. Then it says so 24-hour security company was required to protect the premises and protect the vessel during construction. They don't really tell us how it was calculated, and I think maybe that should be something that we want to inquire about. And then finally, the audit client has estimated that the boat is around about 50% complete at year end. Okay. So just looking at the question, we don't have a required, right? We're going to look at the required just now, and I think that's by design because if you look at a real assessment, you don't get the required during the reading time. So we don't have a required, but if you look at just the question, it seems to me that this is going to be a audit procedures question. So they're going to ask us to create audit procedures. They might ask us to also indicate, what are our concerns about this project, particularly around the fact that we've identified certain inconsistencies in the job card, which we might want to talk about. Okay, so let's go and have a look at what we need to do. Okay, so like expected, this required was asking us to formulate audit procedures that we would perform on the job card. So let's try and see if we can develop these audit procedures. It's important to note that whenever we're compiling audit procedures, we want to try and include a general section to the audit procedures because it is extremely valuable for us as auditors to have that general section. Okay, so the first procedure we would want to perform is you'd want to reperform all the casting and cross-casting of the job card. So students, what we want to do next is we want to then look at the total the account for work in progress on the GL, and we want to agree this job card back to that amount on the GL to make sure that this amount is actually accurately reflected. From the GL, we'd want to obviously then go to the trial balance and the annual financial statement. So I haven't written it down here, but you must remember that from the GL, we go to the trial balance and the annual financial statements and write that down in your answers. So next we'd want to get a management representation letter regarding particularly the assertions of accuracy, valuation and allocation with regard to work in progress. It's important to remember that when we're dealing with anything in inventory, we have to remember net realizable value. So I would even say that management should not only represent on those assertions but also include a statement on net realizable value. Now students, because this particular job has an opening balance, I'd want to also have a look at the prior working papers to trace this opening balance back to those prior working papers, which means we don't need to do too much audit work on that balance. If not, we're going to have to audit the opening balance as well. Okay, so breaking the opening balance down into its previous amounts and then reassessing each of those previous amounts. So students, what I would do then is using my computer audit computer assisted audit technique software, I would analyze the reasonability of the raw materials used and the labor used as well as the overheads used. So basically I would say, given all of the previous jobs that had happened at this specific client, is it considered reasonable that they would have used, 511 K of timber, for example, or is it reasonable that they would have used 160 K of premises in completing it only 50%? Because that can give me an idea of whether their accounting is in line with what their previous accounting was, and therefore an estimate of reasonability. So I'd do that using the CATs. It's important to include CATs in your audit procedures. So that's what I would do there. So guys, what I would do next is ask the client to break down those amounts under direct materials like timber and piping and joints. As you saw in the job card, they weren't broken down. We want a further breakdown of them to try and understand how these amounts were calculated and arrived at. We're then going to reperform any calculations, etc. We're going to want to trace these back to invoices. After we trace them back to invoices, we can then look at them to understand if there are any negative amounts that are appearing in any other calculations. We don't want there to be suspicious or strange things happening, so we'd really want to look at them and identify if there are any things like that. And then finally we can confirm that they actually were transferred out of inventory, or raw materials at least, in the current year and then moved into work in progress in the current year, so that they actually should be added to this job in the current year. That can help us to identify if the valuation is correct, and allocation in fact, because obviously if it wasn't moved out of raw materials, then it shouldn't be in work in progress. So next we'd want to investigate, what exactly are the costs that are related to this specific items. Are there any shipping costs? Are there any transportation costs or additional costs to get this the timber and the piping in the state that it can actually be used in the production of this boat? So we want to try and investigate those types of costs. So guys, the first thing we want to do here is, try and inspect the date on which the contract or agreement was actually put in place to purchase the engine. We also then want to inspect the shipping documents to identify the date of transfer to our audit client. So I just want to stop here and just talk a little bit about what happens if we are dealing with a foreign purchased engine. So it's not familiar, and they don't mention it in the question, but we need to be prepared for it. So if there's a engine that is purchased and that it's a foreign engine, there not only will be some transportation costs and shipping costs, but there's also going to be this idea of a transaction date. So we want to look at things like the SAD 500, which is a document prepared by SARS or the Ports Authority, right? And we want to identify the date on which this amount was the date on which the engine was transferred into South Africa. After we had a look at that and identified the shipment terms, which we got obviously from the agreement, we can then identify when rights and rewards transferred. We would want to obtain a invoice and making sure that the invoice actually had the correct date, the correct amount and description. We take that foreign amount that is on the foreign invoice and we translate it at the date that rights and rewards transferred to our name. Okay, so that would mean that we go to a financial institute and get the transaction or exchange rate data for a given date, and then we transfer this item onto our account on that date. So that is an extra step, but because it's not in this specific scenario, we haven't really spoken about it. But I think we need to be aware of it and just be thinking about what happens if this engine was actually imported. Okay, and we discussed this in the lecture, but I think it's important for us just to think about it now again. Cool. So after we have identified that, now I'm going back to the scenario at hand, which is where it's purchased locally. I would then obtain the invoice that relates to this particular engine, and I would, or we should, and agree, we shouldn't say I, and agree the amount per the invoice to the job card. If there are any transportation costs, and that might include shipping costs, then we should obtain the invoices that relate to the transport. Did I also spell it wrong here? Transport costs, and agree that these amounts are correctly accounted for. So let's let's move on to labor then. So now when we're talking about labor, the first thing we want to do with labor is we want to try and get a hold of those timesheets. Okay, so we'd want to obtain the time sheets to confirm the hours worked on this specific job. Okay, we'd also go to the HR department, and in the HR department we'd obtain the employee files for the workers and agree the rates used per the job card. So we'd want to do that. We can also agree the rates to other sorts of documents like the union agreements with our client. Yeah, union agreements, authorized letters of appointment. We can also agree them to sometimes promotion letters. Yeah, so those types of things. Okay, wage increase letters. So those are the types of letters we want to look at when we looking for the wage rates. Okay, so then we've now agreed the quantity as well as the rate. So we want to, so we've got the rate and the quantity. So really what we're working towards is the recalculation of the amounts per the job card, because we have obtained the basically source documents or the supporting documents for these items. So we're going to recalculate it. Okay, then we'd want to inquire about the actual, the interior designer and the need for this interior designer. So I'm not going to write it out in full, but we want to inquire about the interior designer and why this designer is needed at this early stage. So in your explanation, you can also include the fact that at a 50% completion, it would be strange to have the interior designer included here into the actual creation of the ship. So not really sure why the interior designer is here. So we'd want to probably speak to the foreman, get a bit of an understanding as to why the interior designer is here, and then just try and understand that a bit more. Okay. So the last part is the overheads. Okay, so in the overheads, we're going to want to look at the agreement. So we want to obtain and inspect the agreements that relate to, and I think there was we had what were they? I can't remember now. I don't have the question in front of me. There was premises, right? Rental premises. We also had the scaffolding, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was scaffolding. Yeah, I think it was scaffolding. And we had security. We want to look at these three agreements, and we want to try and agree the amounts that we find in these agreements actually back to, you know, what was put in the job card. And our aim for doing this is to recalculate the amounts in the job card and test these amounts for accuracy, right? Or not actually accuracy, let's say reasonability. So that's what we're really looking for. We really want to try and understand the reasonability of these things. The next thing is we had a bit of a confusion with the dates and the months, right? So we want to also agree the months and dates that are included in the calculation. Of these amounts. Okay, so let's go on to the next page. I just want to add onto actually the overheads. One overhead that is interestingly missing from the job card, which I thought might be there, was actually electricity. If electricity did pop up, what we would do is we'd actually go to the meter reading at year end, identify the units that were used for this particular project, recalculate it based on the municipal charge out rate, and that you can obtain from the bill, and then ensure that this amount actually agrees back to the job card. So just think about electricity as well while we're busy doing this. So now we're on the most, in my view, the most important section, the lower of cost and net realizable value. Okay, so cost and net realizable value, very important. Let's see what we can learn from cost and net realizable value. This is something that always gets tested, so we want to be as vigilant as possible for this part. So first is we want to obtain a report from an expert. Okay, so we'd want to obtain. Now I know that the use of an expert is actually a separate section, so I'm not going to go too much in depth in it, and it will sort of be, you know, on the more higher level, and only the best students will actually get this right when they analyze it. So I just want to focus on it so that even the students that might just need a boost can maybe get some or score some of the marks that are available here. So the first thing is want to obtain an expert in both constructions. You see, both constructions. And then we'd want to obtain a report from the expert. A report from the expert that relates to this construction. That's what we're really doing. We're really constructing boats here. We'd want to, okay, so 1.2, we have to read through the report and review it in light of our audit work. So we want to see if it actually matches what's in our audit work. Okay, that's important. We also want to, you know, discuss the report with the expert, discuss the contents of the report with the expert. Particularly what we're looking for is areas of concern. Okay, so we're looking for areas of concern. Then we'd want to then look at examining, or what's the right word? Yeah, examining is probably the right word. Examining the assumptions made by the expert in the report, and assess the reasonability of these assumptions. Okay, so we're looking for the reasonability of the assumptions, because we want to make sure that they're reasonable, and make sure that we understand exactly what's happening. So we'd want to then look at the completeness of the report. So we're on number what? Yeah, 2.4. Want to assess the completeness of the report. So does the report actually cover everything that we expected it to cover? Report and the work done by the expert. Determine that the conclusions reached are reasonable. So we want to now, after we've done all of this other work, look at the source data. We want to determine if the conclusions reached by the expert is reasonable. Okay, so we've actually worked on the expert's report. So after using the expert's report, after we've analyzed the expert's report, we're going to use the expert's report to assess the selling price of the boat, to confirm that the cost is below the NRV. So I'm just going to say NRV. This may include looking at shipment costs, etc. So you're not going to say etc. in your paper or in your solution, but for the interest of time, we're going to do it here. Okay. Yeah. So those are the sort of things we're going to look for. So that's just very briefly. So we're sort of at the end of the video now, but that's just very briefly, what I would look for and what I would analyze when it comes to this specific question. There are other things, but we've gone through a quick analysis of this question. So I want you to spend some time, analyze it, look at ways that it can change, look at what can change. So like, for example, I said, the engine can be imported instead of being locally sourced. Think about that. Think about how that'll affect you in your answer. Think about things like, if there wasn't an expert, how would we analyze net realizable value? For example, we can say we'd obtain the invoice for a recent sale of a very similar boat, right? And assess the selling price of the boat of the recent sale against the job card. We'll also have to assess the costs to complete. We can probably get the expert to do this for us using the experts report. Using the experts report. Okay. So those are the types of things we want to add. So there are some areas that we can add and build up this type of solution. So I'm going to end the video there, but I want you to analyze this question with a deeper and more critical view so that you can develop a more full answer. Look for things where there's imports. Look for things like with electricity. What happens if there was electricity? What happens if there wasn't an expert? You know, these are the things we want to look for. And just by the way, think about when there would never be an expert. There'll never be an expert if everything is individual, right? So where we're dealing with really individualized and specialized items. So just think about that and analyze that. And this is the class example for the first week that I'm lecturing. So if you have any questions, please pop the questions into the Moodle chat. There's going to be a Moodle chat that's going to be set up for this week. So pop the questions into that Moodle chat and we can get talking. Okay, thanks very much, guys, and I hope you enjoy this video. Bye-bye.